Oh boy, another white guy complaining about comic book movies. Who's excited? Probably can't start the essay like that, can I? Alright, let's try that again. So, like a lot of people, I've been finding myself a lot less enthused with the recent Marvel Studios output. Part of it, I think, is simply that there's too much of it. It used to be that there were 1, 2, 3 movies a year, tops. The Phase 3 release schedule, which was between 2016 and 2019, held roughly to this, with 2 films in 2016 and 3 each in 2017, 2018, and 2019. This was a saturation level release schedule, but it worked. Each real project felt important, it felt well developed, and it felt well spaced out. After Phase 3 ended, and more importantly after the COVID-19 pandemic, that changed with 4 films released in 2021 and another 3 in 2022, alongside, Jesus Christ, 5 television shows released in 2021 and another 3 in 2022. If you're counting, that's 9 projects in 2021 and 6 in 2022, an average about 7.5 a year, where there used to be less than half of that. In an attempt to be fair, we have to acknowledge that the pandemic obviously forced a pretty serious release schedule change, but even if we were to go back in time and make it so that 2020 went off without a hitch, that's still 5 projects a year on average. It took the MCU 9 years to reach 15 projects. Now they're doing that same amount in literally a third of the time. Now, we can argue that that's a problem in and of itself, that there's just so much content that it's impossible to keep up with. I don't necessarily agree, because I don't think quantity is an issue so long as quality is maintained. The problem is that quality isn't being maintained. Now, I'm going to be real and say that I still like the MCU generally, and even projects that I thought were mid, I still found rather fun, or at the very least interesting. Yes, even Eternals, which deserves a sequel and a 5-hour special director's cut. No, I will not be taking questions on this. However, you don't have to be a film critic, or even really care about film as an art form, to tell that there's been something missing from the past few films, with some exceptions. And I think I have an idea as to what that is. It's not especially earth-shattering or insightful, it's really just basic storytelling. It's a lack of character focus, and an overemphasis on plotting and world-building. Phase 4 of the MCU, because like a communist state, this thing needs to work in pre-planned periods of growth and market management, was, frankly, a bit of a mess. Unlike some folks on the internet, I'm not going to catastrophize about it, because I save the catastrophizing for my personal life. Nor am I going to apologize for it, because I try not to apologize for billion-dollar enterprises. There have been some successes, like WandaVision, Ms. Marvel, Shang-Chi, No Way Home, and Loki, and there have been some failures, which I won't name just yet because I want you to watch more of the video before you send me death threats. In general, the successes follow pretty straightforward ideas. An emphasis on character development, detailing a new or returning character with depth and clarity, giving life to their world, and situating them both within their own universe, with their own friends, family, allies, and enemies, as well as within the greater universe. The best example of this was WandaVision, which eschewed traditional superheroics for a rather small-scale story focused on grief and loss, and the ways that we try to bury that pain, like drowning ourselves in reruns of old sitcoms. It was just kind of a good show. Nothing else quite hit that level, but there were still some pretty solid stories in the mix. You know, Loki mixed multiversal shenanigans with really good character development for a fan favorite. Ms. Marvel was a very fun YA-type story with all the shipping and loving family tropes that you could ask for. And Shang-Chi expanded on a forgotten plot point while introducing a cool hero and his best friend, Awkwafina. All of these stories introduced major plot points into the ever-expanding, ever-growing narrative. Shang-Chi reintroduced the Ten Rings, the organization, and set up a mystery revolving around the Ten Rings, the artifact. Ms. Marvel brought in the concept of mutants to the MCU. And obviously Loki kickstarted the aforementioned multiversal shenanigans that we're all currently drowning in. But, and here's the really big important part of this, they did so while emphasizing character development first and foremost. Shang-Chi, at its core, is a story about a family fighting over the legacy and memory of their dead matriarch. It's about a husband raging against fate and a son saying you need to let this go, and ultimately having to stop his father from making the world pay for his pain. Miss Marvel is about a young woman trying to figure out who she is and where she belongs. And when she goes looking for the answers to those questions and finds more than she bargained for, her family and friends are there with her to help her make sense of it, to help her take the pieces of herself that she discovers and to weave them into a new identity. Loki is about a man who committed to who he thought he was, only to, in a bit of a happy accident, discover in advance just how disastrously that turns out for him. And then he's given a second chance to become someone else. Someone heroic, someone who tries to save the world rather than destroy it. Someone who his other self in another life would have been very proud of. I can go through literally all of the most successful Phase 4 entries and say similar things, but I can also just say the same basic things about any good MCU project. Most of the films in the previous phases followed a similar playbook. Character work first, world building and plotting second. There were some in the earlier phases that reversed this rule, certainly, but generally speaking, they were considered the weaker entries. The problem is that they've become much more prevalent in recent years. Black Widow's greatest crime is that it came out like 6 years too late and should have honestly been made immediately after Civil War. Its second greatest crime is that it doesn't do anything to radically alter our understanding of Natasha. It's a story that involves her, certainly, but we don't really get the sense that she was changed by this adventure. This is at best a side story. The most important thing it did was introduce her family, including Sheriff Hopper, the Red Guardian, and the girl from Midsommar, Yelena Belova, who is my favorite character, not because I have a crush on Florence Pugh, but because... No, it's because I have a crush on Florence Pugh. Yeah. Anyway, the purpose of the film wasn't to expand on this character that we know, it was really just about getting the new pieces on the board. A lot of the movies and shows do this, of course, but in this case it's particularly egregious because the main character is technically dead, and the side story we're watching is really about introducing her replacement, which is profoundly sad, even if that replacement is Florence Pugh. Eternals, which again I will personally defend to the death for no reason other than I find it kind of funny, should have been almost all character development. The problem is that you can't really develop 10 plus characters adequately in only 2.5 hours. Instead, the focus seemed mostly to, once again, get pieces on the board, as it were. To introduce the Eternals, the Celestials, the Deviants, the fact there's a horrific rock titan just kind of jutting out of the ocean, which I'm assuming will be pretty important later on. Oh, also the Black Knight. And Blade. And Harry Styles, because why friggin' not? Let's bring in Harry Styles. Someone at some point should have recognized that this story was far too large for a single film and should have either been a very audacious two-parter or a 5 to 10 episode miniseries, but it seemed like the concern was more about moving the machine along, rather than giving the project the special care it honestly deserved. Seriously, I actually think the idea of these mythic beings becoming our first superheroes is really inspired. It really gets the collective unconscious turning, you know what I mean? And I'm very disappointed they just kind of dropped it and let it land with a thud the way that they did. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which, again, is a movie that I generally liked, is so busy being a multiverse movie that it basically forgets to be a Doctor Strange film. Strange's arc basically doesn't exist. The film more or less just happens around him. Strange starts the film sad that his being turned to dust has cost him a potential relationship with Dr. Regina George, but he'd already lost that relationship by the end of the first film. By the end of this film, he's finally gotten over his ex, which, you know, good for you, buddy. Glad you came out of your cage and you're doing just fine. But that's pretty much all he's done. The idea is supposed to be that the multiverse offers the possibility of a different life, One where different choices were made by yourself and by others, which would result in greater happiness for you. But this angle of the story is wholly owned by Wanda. Strange's inability to get over his ex kinda rings hollow in comparison to Wanda's desire to be reunited with her children and to live the peaceful life of a soccer mom in New Jersey. There's an angle here, certainly. There's a version of this film, possibly a third film instead of a second film, where Strange is much more regretful of the choices he's made and the people that he's lost. And so the temptation of simply jumping to a new world in which he made different choices lands a lot better. The problem is that Marvel already made a movie about abusing magic to undo your mistakes and getting involved in multiversal nonsense. It's called Spider-Man No Way Home. And, it's a pretty good movie. But, to return to my point, Multiverse of Madness was more about setting up plot points. Explore the multiverse, introduce America Chavez, have fun little cameos that tease future stories. It was more about that than it was about actually developing Strange as a character, which is ostensibly the point of these standalone movies. And this one's technically Phase 5, but I'm including anyway because these phases are completely arbitrary marketing gimmicks and mean absolutely nothing. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is the most recent and, in my opinion, the most egregious example of what it is that I'm talking about. Now, here's the thing. It's not a horrifically bad movie. Every Marvel movie, much like every godforsaken Jurassic World movie, is focus tested into, at worst, perfect mediocrity. If a Marvel movie is the worst movie you've ever seen, I think that means you just need to see more movies. But I digress. It is stunningly mediocre. It has little real stakes, no real character development, and generally none of the charm of either the first or second Ant-Man movies, which you can complain about them all you want, but they were very genuinely charming and fun little movies. They may have low stakes, but at the least they have some stakes, unlike Quantumania, which introduced a whole world with a whole cast of characters whose names I cannot even begin to remember. I do remember Luis, though. Luis was great. The point of Quantumania was to introduce the big bad villain Kang the Conqueror, and honestly, the idea for the film is sound on its face. You take Ant-Man and the Wasp, the two who've mostly done with, small-scale personal threats, and you have them fight the big bad evil guy who's definitely going to have a body count by the end of the next Avengers movie. It's a David and Goliath thing, putting the major villain up against the two least likely to beat him, but the most likely to be able to hold him off and escape. Then, afraid of the terrible threat that's coming, they get to work rounding up heroes new and old to fight off the new threat. That's a very basic idea and would need some fleshing out, but at its core, it's a solid start to an arc. It's what we call compelling. The problem, really, is that Quantumania doesn't do anything with this. Kang is introduced as the evil emperor of a Star Wars world so boring it only showed up in one of the lamer expanded universe novels. Michelle Pfeiffer exposits a lot of information that would have been really helpful to know like 15 minutes ago. We get wrapped up in a bunch of explosions and running sequences and Rick and Morty jokes. They sick some ants on Kang and punch him into a box, and that's kinda the whole movie. No one has a real arc. The story more or less just happens, and at the end, everyone is in roughly the same place they were when they started. Even the idea introduced in the marketing that Kang would offer Scott the chance to go back in time before he lost all his time to the blip is never really brought up, even when it was mentioned he offered the same deal to Janet when she was trapped previously. Scott just kinda does what Kang asks because Kang threatens his daughter, which, honestly, is still more than Hope does. I think she had maybe 10 lines in the whole film. And she's a title character, so that's really bad writing. All of the character elements, all the things that made the previous films fun and engaging, is basically lost in favor of putting down plot points on the chart. Introduce Kang, do quantum realm stuff, make sure Cassie has a suit and can go big and go small. All of this could have been done in an elegant and engaging way that emphasized character and been satisfying to see unfold. It just wasn't. Instead, it was a collection of plot points begging the audience to care, with the implicit threat that all of this is going to be on the test. In the lead up to Infinity War and Endgame, the solo movies were used to bring characters through their arcs, which often dovetail with the big event Avengers movies, some more neatly than others. It was almost never perfect. There's more than enough analysis of which arcs worked and which didn't, but generally the point was that we saw these characters change and grow in their solo films, which made us more invested in their fates when it came time for the big action figure smash-up event films. Again, this is simple storytelling. People respond to characters more than they do to just events. You can't just blow up a spaceship and expect an audience to care. You have to make them care about at least one person on that spaceship. Otherwise, it's just another thing that's exploding. But now, every film is an event film, and it's taking away from the character work that makes the event films so engaging. When Thor returns, a bloated, slovenly, drunken mess to Asgard, the home he lost, he's met by the mother he lost, and reminded that he's free to become whoever he needs, not necessarily who he's expected to be. And when he calls for his hammer, it returns to him, a reminder that he remains worthy no matter how he looks or feels. This moment would have had no impact without his losses in Dark World and Ragnarok. When Steve lifted Mjolnir in Endgame, it was the climax of his character arc. We saw how he held on to his morals and his ideals throughout his films, and how much it cost him. So when he lifts the hammer, we understand that he is, perhaps always has been, worthy. It's the payoff to a lot of setup. But without that setup in the first Avenger and Winter Soldier and Civil War, we wouldn't have cared. And of course, when Tony steals the Infinity Stones and uses their power to snap away Thanos' army, making the ultimate sacrifice, it simply would not have landed if we didn't see him change from being a genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, to becoming damned Iron Man. These movies, the whole MCU project, really, work because the characters work. And sadly, it seems like Marvel's forgotten that. I hope they haven't, and as of mid-March, when I'm recording this, it seems like they figured out that they're doing something wrong, because just about every single one of their streaming series has been delayed indefinitely. This can, I think, will prove to be a good thing. Delays can help make stories better. I just hope that they get their focus back on the characters, because until they do, the MCU machine is simply out of order. Hi, hello, that's the end of the essay. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. Or at the very least, you, stuck all the way to the end. If you liked this, do the whole rigmarole, like, comment, subscribe. You can tell me I'm an idiot, that's fine, that's engagement. I'm pretty sure the numbers go up no matter what. Yeah, I hope to do more stuff like this, not necessarily about Marvel. I have a lot of movies that I'd like to talk about. I have a lot of video games I enjoy speaking about. Hopefully I can entertain you, and maybe we can find something interesting to talk about. Alright, thank you very much. Have a good one.